Fear Street, Prom Queen is the fourth installment in the Fear Street franchise, telling a more standalone story than the previous three entries while still keeping what made the earlier films work. Even though the movie is rated R, it definitely skews towards a slightly younger audience of young adults, continuing the legacy of the original Fear Street novel series by R.L. Stine, which was also meant for teens and young adults. However, the movie still has many bloody moments and gory deaths, staying true to the slasher subgenre. Even though Prom Queen has an entirely new cast, it definitely treads familiar ground with the franchise, and a number of the new characters feel like they fill very similar roles, down to the ways in which they die. Even if these kills don't tend to be as gory as some other slasher films, there are plenty of gruesome moments to look through, as the movie shows the untimely fates of this group of Shadyside High students. 10. Christy Reno. Played by Ariana Greenblatt. Christy wears red cowboy boots, a red plaid skirt, and a leather jacket in Fear Street, Prom Queen courtesy of Netflix. Christy's death was the first in the movie, and it also happened to be the least brutal of the bunch. In fact, her death wasn't actually shown in its entirety, just implied. She was alone outside the school, after selling some drugs to a pair of Sunnyvale kids, when the masked killer came up behind her and cut into her shoulder with a fire axe. She fell down, and as the killer brought the axe down once again to finish the job, it cut away to a new scene. While this could have been extremely brutal if it were fully shown, the cutaway meant that it didn't have the same impact as some of the other killings in Prom Queen. The moment was very similar to the first kill in Fear Street Part 1, where Maya Hawke's character was killed, but this one was significantly less gory. 9. Nancy Falconer. Played by Catherine Waterston. Catherine Waterston as Nancy Falconer in Netflix's Fear Street, Prom Queen. The second least gory death in the film was also the last kill, as Nancy was the final murderer left after her family had been taken care of. She was the not-so-surprising twist villain during the end of Prom Queen, and her death came very quickly, as Laurie, fighting for her life, grabbed a trophy and smashed it into the side of Nancy's skull, taking her down once and for all. Nancy didn't actually die during the ending, as she was still sputtering a few words as Laurie left her, but Prom Queen's mid-credit scene showed that she had indeed been killed. This death was very quick, and not very gory, but the trophy cracked into her head in a pretty nasty way, and the fact that the aftermath was actually shown made this kill hit harder than Christie's. 8. Debbie. Played by Rebecca Ablock. Girl in a prom dress with blood splattered on her face in Fear Street Prom Queen. Debbie's death scene was definitely a step up from the previous two entries, as it was shown in its entirety, and was committed by the actual murderers. After Judd had been killed in a way that earned him a pretty high spot on this list, Debbie was killed after being pushed into an electrical panel full of live wires, which obviously electrocuted her to death. While this was definitely a pretty terrifying and brutal way to die, Prom Queen didn't actually show it to be all that horrific when it happened. There were a few close-up shots of Debbie's eyes as she died, but overall, she was just tangled in a bunch of wires and shocked to death in a pretty bloodless manner. Especially when compared to Judd's death, this one didn't feel too shocking or gruesome, despite it being a pretty entertaining killing. Tyler Torres. Played by David Iacocco. Tiffany Falconer glares at Tyler Torres in Fear Street, Prom Queen image via Netflix. Tyler's death was undoubtedly the most unexpected, but unfortunately, that didn't exactly translate to being all that brutal of a killing. It happened when he and Laurie snuck away from the prom, and he was trying to get a little too pushy with Laurie. The two were talking, and suddenly, a knife was thrust into the top of his head, which presumably killed him instantly. While there wasn't much blood or gore shown here, the sudden and harsh nature of this killing definitely made it stand out when compared to the previous entries. Brutality isn't always about gore and blood, and the fact that this came nearly out of nowhere made it seem like a much more intense killing than it would have been otherwise, and if it had been more obviously built up to, it probably wouldn't have hit quite as hard. 6. Melissa. Played by Ella Rubin. Melissa looks over her shoulder shocked in Fear Street, Prom Queen image via Netflix. The method of Melissa's death was very similar to Tyler's, but where he got a longer knife through the skull, she was killed by a butcher's knife across the face. Melissa's death was built up over a much longer period of time than Tyler's, as she was being chased by the masked murderer in the changing rooms for a few minutes before she was actually killed. While Tyler's death was impactful because of its sudden nature, Melissa's death just felt more brutal in the manner in which she was killed. The knife cut into her face and remained stuck there, giving us a close-up look at the blood dripping down her head before she slammed into the ground. The impact felt very heavy, with a lot of weight behind the strike, and seeing her head with the knife still embedded in it was a brutal sight. Gerald. Played by Brennan Clost. Brennan Clost as Gerald screaming in Fear Street Prom Queen. Gerald's death was also very sudden, and the fact that it happened so casually and with so much blood made it even more horrific. Gerald was a very minor character throughout the movie, only appearing in a few scenes, one of which was when the murderer came charging into the prom, intent on killing Laurie. Gerald just happened to be in the way, so, after cutting off Claire's leg, the killer sliced his head clean off. This death was very surprising, and was absolutely one of the goriest moments in the movie. While a beheading like this has been more brutal in other movies and shows, it worked very well here, with the classic spurt of blood shooting out of the neck stump before Gerald's body hit the ground. Most kills in the movie up until this point had been stabbings or cuttings, so it was nice to see this kind of variety return to Fear Street's deaths. Tiffany Falconer, played by Fina Straza. After the reveal that Tiffany's dad was one of the killers, the fact that her mother was also one was essentially a foregone conclusion, as the movie showed that there were multiple murderers. However, Tiffany's contributions to these killings were a fun surprise, and made her brutal manner of death all the more satisfying. As she was gearing up to finally kill Laurie, she was kicked in the stomach, falling off the balcony onto a statue of a falcon, impaling her through the chest. The brutality of this death was mostly in how well it was executed in the scene itself, with her fall being given the weight it needed to feel as impactful as possible. Her turn to total insanity after seeming like a more sympathetic character was a very fun twist on the bully to friend trope, and her death felt like a worthy conclusion to her character.